All right, that was more 11 seconds. But hi, welcome to the Colorado HOA Information and Resource Center, HOA Forum on wildfire mitigation and HOA communities. On your screen, you should see the Colorado HOA Information and Resource Center in blue on the left. If you don't see that, please let me know. Today, we do have a guest speaker who I am happy to introduce here in a couple of minutes. My name is Nick Altman. I'm the HOA Information Officer with the Colorado HOA Information and Resource Center. Amanda Lopez is our program assistant. I think she'll be joining this call here shortly.
I am here.
Oh, hi, Amanda.
I can't start my video, but hi, guys. Nice to have you all here. Thank you all for joining.
Perfect. So most of you already know what the HOA Center does and does not do, but just in case this is your first time joining us on one of these online webinars, we provide information to homeowners regarding their basic rights and responsibilities under CCIOA. We gather, analyze, and report information through complaints. We provide online forums like this one, and we also register HOAs pursuant to Section 401 of CCIOA. What the HOA Center does not do is act as a regulatory program or investigate or intervene in disputes between homeowners or their associations. We do not act as an advocate, nor do we enforce an HOA's failure to register. As always, this presentation should not be construed as legal advice. Please consult with a qualified Colorado attorney. So to start us off, I have a poll for our audience members today to help us understand our attendees just a little bit better. I'll go over a few common definitions important in the HOA fire mitigation realm and do a quick review of HOA fire mitigation legislation that Colorado has seen over the years. Our guest speaker from Wildfire Partners will then take over to share with us her experience and expertise in fire hardening and wildfire mitigation. I'll then try and wrap it up with a few pro tips from the HOA Center, and we'll take any questions from the audience. All right, let's see if I can get my poll started here. So you should see a poll on your screen. There's 4 questions. You can go through and answer those. Question number 1 is, do you live in Boulder County? Yes or no? Question number 2 is, do you live in an area you would consider high risk for wildfire? Yes or no? Question number 3 is, are you in a leadership or management position in your HOA? Yes or no? And then the last question is, on a list of priorities, how high would you say fire mitigation and fire hardening ought to be in your community? And I'll give this 20 seconds for everyone to answer. And I'll share these results too. All right, looks like responses have stopped coming in. Let's see if I can get this shared here. All right, so about 13% of our attendees today live in Boulder County. You should be able to see these results. If not, let me know. On the question, do you live in an area you would consider high risk for wildfire? 90% of you said yes. 10% of you said no. On the question, are you in a leadership or management position in your HOA? 64% of you, or 52 of you said yes, and the remainder said no. On a list of priorities, how high would you say fire mitigation and fire hardening ought to be in your community? 69% said high, 31% said medium, and 1% said low. Happy to share these results with you if you email me, or I'll try to at least. All right, going back here. So, all right, definitions. We'll just start with defensible space here. So defensible space, this is from the Colorado State Forest Service, is the area around the home or other structure that has been modified to reduce fire hazards. Dwelling is from Colorado Revised Statutes 18-1-901, which states a building which is intended to be used or usually used by a person for habitation. Fire hardened building materials, another definition you might see frequently used. So basically, it is a material that meets the criteria of ignition resistant construction set forth in sections 504 to 506 of the most recent version of the International Wildland Urban Interface Code, or definition number 2. Oops, I jumped ahead there, sorry. We're back. Definition number 2 there, the criteria set forth in the most recent version of the NFPA Standard 1140, Standard for Wildland Protection, and also the criteria for reducing structure ignition hazards from wildland fire set forth in the most recent version of the NFPA Standard 1144, reducing structure ignitions from wildland fire. Also, the third definition is the requirements for a wildfire prepared home established by the IBHS. And these definitions are straight from House Bill 24-1091. IBHS stands for the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or its successor organization, and the NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association, or its successor organization. All right, let's touch on some Colorado legislation here just for a few minutes. Senate Bill 05-100 was signed into law back in 2005 and granted unit owners the right to modify their property for fire mitigation purposes. In essence, a unit owner may remove trees, shrubs, or other vegetation to create defensible space around a dwelling for fire mitigation purposes. On one of 3 conditions: that they obtain a written defensible space plan created for the property by either the Colorado State Forest Service, an individual or company certified by a local government entity to create such a plan, or the fire chief, fire marshal, or fire protection district within whose jurisdiction the unit is located. Keep in mind, if the association has any standards regarding slash removal, stump height, revegetation, or contractor regulations, the work performed by the unit owner must still comply with those standards. If the board has no written policy around this type of work, it might consider drafting a policy with the help of legal counsel. If a unit owner or board is interested in obtaining a written defensible space plan for their property or community, they should contact the Colorado State Forest Service. And there's a slide there with their telephone number and email address. Moving on to Senate Bill 06-089. This bill passed a year after 05-100 and basically prohibited associations from requiring cedar shakes or other flammable roofing material on a unit owner's property. If the association has this type of language in its governing documents, it is considered void and unenforceable. House Bill 24-1091 was signed into law this year. It's the most recent legislation that Colorado has seen, and it prohibits any covenants or language that would otherwise restrict or disallow the use, maintenance, or installation of fire-hardened building material on a unit owner's property. Just like Senate Bill 06-89, if an HOA does have this type of language in its governing documents, this act hereby considers it void and unenforceable. Again, just as some of the previous legislation, an association may still develop standards that impose reasonable restrictions on the design, dimensions, and placement. However, just as long as they don't increase the cost of housing by more than 10%, or require a review period greater than 60 days after the application date for which it's filed. So the second one I thought was pretty important. So that's why I included these, or both of those concepts in red there. But the 60-day review period, it should not. So if an application for installation of a fire hardened building material is not denied or returned for modifications within that 60-day review period, then the application is deemed approved, automatically approved. So the board has to make a decision prior to that 60-day time frame. The review process, let me get to my next slide here. The review process for that has to be transparent, which is why I included that in green there. And also the basis for denial, any kind of denial of an application must be described in reasonable detail and in writing. Denial of an application must not be arbitrary or capricious. All right, so that kind of wraps up our legislation, and I'm happy to introduce our guest speaker today. Abby Silver is the Outreach Coordinator for Boulder County's Wildfire Partners program. She is a certified wildfire mitigation specialist with almost 20 years experience in the field. She's performed well over 1,000 wildfire mitigation home assessments as part of Boulder County's voluntary Wildfire Partners program and Boulder County's regulatory building permit requirements. So I'm going to stop my screen share here. And Abby, I hope you're on the call and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Let me smoothly transition to my screen share. And Nick, please let me know when you're seeing my slides.
All right, we can see it.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I'm here to talk about wildfire mitigation in HOA communities. And I imagine that many of you, like myself, love our beautiful state and love living in or near the natural environment. But remember that fire has been a natural occurrence in Colorado since long before human settlement. And nowadays we find ourselves in a period characterized by hotter, drier weather. And in many cases, especially if you live in the forested parts of the state, in areas where land management choices like fire suppression have resulted in heavy fuel loading. So in other words, overgrown forest. Those of us who live in the flatter areas that used to be prairie or grasslands, often surrounded by lovely open space parks, also have risk associated with where we have chosen to live. And when we built or moved here, we weren't really thinking about wildfire being historically part of the ecosystem. So today I'm going to talk about wildfire mitigation and some of the unique challenges and opportunities that are available to residents of HOAs. Because HOAs have rules, they have a sort of muscle or power that other communities generally don't have. And you can choose to use this to your advantage, but that might also mean pushing for changes or rules that already don't, changes to rules that don't already exist and that don't support wildfire mitigation best practices. As Nick just explained, state law is changing and now supports wildfire mitigation efforts, but we still need to kind of implement the culture change that goes along with it as well. So I'm going to start off today with a little background on wildfire and wildfire behavior. And then I'll talk briefly about wildfire mitigation best practices and how applying them can help reduce risk in your communities. And then we'll end with plenty of time for questions and answers. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section, you know, the Q&A window at the, I think on the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'm not 100% familiar with where those buttons all are right now, the way my screen's oriented. So if I said that wrong, someone can jump in and correct me. But use the Q&A is the takeaway. So what is a wildfire, first of all? Wildfires are fires that start in the wildland fuels or spread into wildland fuels before they can be controlled. And when we think of wildfires, we're really thinking about these types of fires that happen under extreme conditions and therefore have more extreme consequences. So wildfire is not the same as a house fire. Our firefighters are really well equipped to respond to a house fire and respond to localized events and to respond under, you know, sort of typical weather conditions. So how's a wildfire situation different? Because wildfires are starting in places that are hard to access in the wildland fuels, the response time, which might be like 2 or 3 minutes in a city, is going to be much slower than for a fire that starts in a neighborhood. So wildfires can be highly intense and or widely dispersed by the time they reach the developed communities. In these situations, firefighting resources can become overwhelmed. And when the fire behavior is too intense or their efforts need to be focused on evacuation and life safety, at some point, they definitely won't be able to protect every home. Once the fire is burning through a community, it can spread quickly from house to house, and the closer the homes are to each other, the more quickly this can happen. And fire can spread in various ways. It can spread through direct flame contact when the homes are close together, or from radiant heat when the fire is really intense, even if the homes are further apart. And then it also spreads by embers, which can be flying several miles ahead of the flame front and cause multiple new ignitions in various locations. In other words, once the first home or homes ignite, this can quickly lead to a domino effect. I think we all probably remember Boulder County's Marshall Fire, which is a pretty top of mind example of this. The first time this really hit my radar was in 2013 in the Waldo Canyon Fire outside of Colorado Springs, where an entire subdivision pretty much went down in about 3 or 4 hours. Lahaina, Paradise, and Santa Rosa, California. I think most of us can think of examples of this that made an impression. So wildfire risk is not evenly distributed across the state or even within our communities. Not all of us are in danger of finding ourselves in the middle of a forest fire or a grass fire, but it's important to note that flying embers are the most common cause of structure ignition, which is why it behooves all of us to at least give the topic a bit of thought. So what can we do? When we live in more densely developed communities, because of that domino effect I was just talking about, mitigation really needs to be seen as a community effort. We want to create community resiliency by hardening the homes, creating and maintaining defensible space, and by thinking about the most vulnerable members of our community too. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and Nick touched on this, about fire hardened building materials. As he shared the definition, I'm going to sort of more talk about like what they really are. So these are non-combustible materials, and some examples, for instance, for siding would be fiber cement board or stucco, brick, things like that that really are very hard to ignite compared to wood siding. Class A roofs, which is a little bit more of a technical thing to discuss, but basically many materials can be part of a Class A roof assembly, including the ones that are very typically used, like asphalt shingles, metal, and tile. Wood shake shingles, obviously, or maybe I shouldn't say obviously, but trust me, do not fit into that Class A rating. And the more sort of hardcore or heavy duty the materials are, the more resilient they're going to be, especially when it comes to roofing materials. So those hail resistant asphalt shingles are also providing more protection from wildfire. As an HOA, you can allow, and we now at least know that you can't totally prohibit or recommend or potentially require that these types of materials are incorporated into new builds and remodels. So if you're on the board or management team for multifamily housing and you're involved in long-term planning for upgrades or replacement of things like roof or siding, I highly recommend planning to use these types of materials. And I just wanted to share on the Wildfire Partners website, we do have a resource that is up on your screen. It's just called Internet Search Terms, and it's just words that you can plug into a Google search if you want to learn more about these various topics. And the materials that we're talking about, generally speaking, are available at your local home and building supply or hardware store. So I want to kind of sidebar here and reiterate that not all communities are created equal when it comes to wildfire risk. So a multifamily apartment building in the middle of downtown Denver is less likely to be exposed to wildfire than a community in Grand County that's surrounded by forest. And, based on the results of the polls, I think most people on this call think that they live in an area that is, has a fairly high, I can't remember what the question, high risk of wildfire. So I'm guessing we don't have a lot of super urban residents, but again, don't forget about those flying embers. They can really travel. So these best practices are kind of designed for everybody. But when we talk about fencing, I'm not saying that there isn't a place in Colorado for wood fencing. I don't think that place is in our high vulnerability communities. So fences, wood fences can definitely draw fire from the landscape into communities, as well as spreading fire from home to home once the fence ignites. So what do you do instead of wood fencing? And I will be the first to admit, wood fencing is probably the most cost-effective or least expensive option when it comes to fencing. So some of what I'm sharing with you maybe should be thought of as being aspirational, like something that your community can save for and implement over time. The other thing that I would sort of say, if you can't afford to do everything at once, is to be strategic about what you're doing when. And from a wildfire standpoint, what I mean by that is think about where the wind is coming from, where fire is likely to be coming from, or embers are likely to blow from, and maybe start with replacing combustible with non-combustible fencing on that side of the community first. And I'm just going to generalize and say that is most likely going to be the western side of most communities in our state. There are obviously options to consider: masonry, adobe, metal fencing. There's also like composite, like fiber cement board, and other types of metal. I've seen a lot of creative solutions. Not sure what the price point is on any or all of them, but there's plenty to look at if you just get on your computer and start Googling non-combustible fencing or metal fencing or things like that. We have on the left-hand side of your screen there what I think is a very attractive version of steel fencing. And then we have also a question mark here. Is composite material non-combustible fencing? I think there's been a lot of research recently that seems to indicate that plastic composite fencing may actually perform worse in a fire than wood in terms of heat and flame length. So if you do have or choose to have this type of material, you'll want to at least be mindful of what materials you use around it. And I strongly suggest avoiding the use of wood mulch as an edging material along the fence line. Gravel being a really good option. So here's just one more thing about fencing. If you are finding that your budget is limited, what's really the most important thing to keep fence from acting as a fuse to draw fire to the home is to break up that fuse before it reaches the side of the building. So what you can see on the left is an example of this, where there's a wood fence, but the final gate section has been converted into a metal. There's also in the center an example of breaking up that fence in sections. So if there's maybe a gate even in the middle of the fence, like retrofitting that to a non-combustible material, or combining sections of hardscaping. I'm so sorry, I think my screen might be blipping for a second. With combustible and non-combustible, so that there isn't a continuous fuse. And if you really just don't have the money to retrofit anything, another solution potentially on the far right there is to add gravel to the 1.5 to 2 feet on either side of the fence, and then be on top of the maintenance. Don't allow that to get weedy and overgrown with grass, but having that non-combustible surface without the fine fuels should at least offer some measure of protection. So another area to sort of think about is patios and decks. So a nice concrete patio is a very non-combustible option to have next to your home versus a wood deck. Another option to think about is replacing just the deck boards with composite decking. And I want to, without going really too deep into the weeds on this, just point out that not all composite products are created equal. They don't all have the same fire rating, because composite is a mixture of plastic and sawdust, or plastic and some other product. Excuse me. And the more wood there is, sort of the more likely it is to burn, and the more flame length you're going to see from this product. So if you're considering this, check with your local building department if they have specifications, or as Nick pointed out, there are specifications in the International WUI code that you could refer to, or talk to a building professional. And then the last sort of piece of the puzzle in terms of protecting our structures is the non-combustible perimeter. This is really our last final line of defense. And the idea is that this should be, first of all, a hardscape surface, so gravel being the most cost-effective. There are other things like concrete or pavers or flagstones that are obviously also non-combustible. If you're in the high country, even just bare mineral soil. If you're in an area that doesn't really regenerate vegetation very quickly, that can be a very inexpensive option that's fairly easy to maintain. And ideally, that perimeter would be 5 feet wide. You at least want it to extend out beyond the eaves of the building. So that sort of covered the house. Now the defensible space portion. So when it comes to creating defensible space, this could look really different in the forested community versus in a more urban area. So this is another arena where your rules and policies should really be reviewed by your management team or your board to make sure that they allow for wildfire mitigation best practices in landscaping and in defensible space. So the example up on the screen right now is more of that typical sort of mountain community where the homes are far apart from each other. And the Colorado State Forest Service is a really great resource in helping you to create a defensible space plan. They have guidelines that I really highly recommend you all follow when creating those plans. And you can low limb. I mean, the idea is to create vertical and horizontal separation between what we call fuels, which is our trees and shrubs and grasses, so that fire behavior would become less and less intensive as it comes closer and closer to the house or community that you're trying to protect. So I think Nick may have pointed this out, but HOAs can make this easier for residents by offering services like free community chipping, or by really making sure you don't have requirements in your covenants that say you have to have a certain number of trees or screen your house in a certain way that is, contraindicated by wildfire mitigation best practices. So it's going to look different from one community to the next. In our more urban neighborhoods or housing complexes, which is not necessarily what this picture is of at the moment, but obviously our homes can be a lot closer together than this. This is really going to boil down to neighbors working together, or at least bearing in mind each other's proximity when it comes to landscaping and siting outbuildings, storing firewood, and keeping on top of maintenance like mowing. So I imagine that most HOAs already have rules about this type of thing, but I'm going to sort of quickly review some of the most common issues beyond fencing. So junipers, they have been somewhat beloved across this entire country. At the moment, I know at least in Boulder County, we have a lot of junipers in subdivisions and multifamily complexes that have been there for many, many decades. They started off as adorable little shrubs. Now they are sort of a wall of unmitigated fuel in front of people's houses or in their communities. So we're really encouraging people to transition away from junipers, remove them whenever possible, and consider replacing them with something that's more fire hardened. Similarly to the forest, we just need to be cognizant of this horizontal and vertical fuel separation in our neighborhoods. So we have sort of two types of trees: deciduous trees, which are the ones that drop their leaves in the fall, and they're generally much less likely to ignite, but those dried leaves can be a hazard during the fall when they could easily be ignited by embers. Plus, we still also see a lot of conifers, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. We love our mature trees. They add to our quality of life. And, many of these trees have developed to be somewhat or very fire resilient. But the reason they don't have to shed their leaves in the fall is because they have a lot of oil in their needles, sort of like antifreeze in your car. So these oils are highly combustible. Once they catch fire, they burn hot, and they will quickly carry fire from the base of the tree to the top of the tree. And when the trees are tall, that becomes, first of all, a lot of heat and fuel, and second of all, a lot harder to fight as a firefighter. So in this photo, you can see like the concept behind managing this is just to low limb these trees up a little bit so that it's easy to rake out beneath them and that debris isn't accumulating there that can be easily ignited if embers are landing there, or if you have like a slow creeping grass fire that somehow comes right up to the edge of the tree. And I do want to sort of point out that in the forest, we talk about low limbing, like taking those bottom branches off up to a height of 6 to 10 feet off the ground. In communities, really, you don't want to limb them that high at all, because that could allow wind to sort of compromise the tree as it turns it into sort of an umbrella or a kite type of situation. So really, we're just talking about limbing up a few feet from the ground. So there's also landscaping choices to consider, like choosing fire resilient plants like natives and succulents, and keeping up on the watering if need be, so that plants have a certain amount of moisture in them, if that's permitted where you're living. Like junipers, wood mulch is a traditional landscaping choice that deserves a rethink. We certainly don't want to see it right up against our homes or buildings in general. So think about your rules where you live and whether they allow residents to make use of things like art and sculpture and flower pots and other alternatives to having vegetation right up against the side of the house. And consider showcasing some xeriscape principles in your common areas if you want to encourage people to envision landscaping a little bit differently. So I've also been asked to touch on insurance and how fire hardening might help reduce your insurance rates. And I'm going to be honest, this is not my field of expertise. At this point, in my experience, fire hardening is a tactic I've really seen more effectively used to prevent non-renewal of insurance rather than in reducing premiums. I think there are maybe some companies that offer small discounts for certain things like sort of high quality roofing, which have ancillary benefits as wildfire mitigation, but I wouldn't count on that immediately having an impact on your insurance rates. I really don't have a crystal ball and I have no idea what's going to help our insurance rates in the state. But I think that if insurance companies can start feeling like they're going to make money again in Colorado, they're going to come back and want to insure us. And the two things that have really impacted their profit margins have been hail and wildfire. So reducing property loss during wildfires due to good wildfire mitigation is probably a pretty important component of getting our insurance options broadened again. I guess I'd say it like that. So one last thing about insurance, I think the most important advice I can share on this topic is really to keep on top of the cost of replacing, i.e. rebuilding your home and raise your coverage accordingly. I think we've all heard that it's very easy to become underinsured. And when labor and or building materials are going up faster than the general cost of living, your policy is likely not really keeping pace with the actual cost of construction. So if you know a professional, construction professional, a builder, I would definitely ask for their opinion in addition to your insurance broker's opinion. And a few resources, as we've mentioned already a few times, the Colorado State Forest Service is a great resource. The CSU Extension, it's a program that is all across the state. Look for your local office. You can talk to your local building department or emergency management department. Local fire protection districts often have people who can advise on wildfire mitigation, like your fire marshals. There are a few, like Colorado Springs or Elk Creek in Jefferson County, that actually have wildfire mitigation programs. There are wildfire councils, including the West Region Wildfire Council, which encompasses Delta, Gunnison, Montrose, Ouray, and San Miguel counties. And Grand County also has their own wildfire council. And for those of you who live in Boulder County, of course, there is Wildfire Partners. We are the county's wildfire mitigation program. So thank you, and I am going to turn this back over to Nick for some closing remarks, and then we'll go to the question and answer section.
Perfect. 1 second, let me get my screen shared here. While I'm fumbling with my screen, Abby, I had a couple consumers email me some questions. I was wondering if you might be able to answer these. I'll just pose them live here. The first question, this HOA is concerned about the potential cost of completely replacing their wood fencing. So their question is, what do you think of using fire retardant paint or stain on wood fencing instead of instead of replacing the fence altogether?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that we hear pretty often. What our program does not endorse those types of products, not necessarily because they won't be effective in the short term, but there are a few things about it. One is they need to be, well, as the product specifications call for professional application, and that application is supposed to happen within specific temperature ranges and at specific thicknesses. Homeowners putting them on themselves maybe not as likely to do it exactly perfectly. And then I also think those products were really not developed with the low humidity and high UV of Colorado in mind. So our sense is that they might give people a false sense of security that really is going to sort of sunset quite quickly. So that's my take on that question.
All right, I had another one here. Are there types of wood mulch that are okay to use?
I guess the short answer is no, not up against the home. Like all wood mulch will burn, and it also tends to smolder. It can, sort of in the way that ashes can smolder and reignite over time when wind blows on them. So we definitely prefer or tell people really not to use wood mulch at all, and consider using rock, or there's a product called squeegee, which is sort of like pea gravel, but designed to allow for a bit more water to seep through, that people could consider using instead of wood mulch. That being said, it's not like you can't use it anywhere if you're trying to mulch around, the base of individual trees that are dispersed across the landscape. I don't see a real issue with that. It's more about location and quantity.
Okay, and then last question that was emailed into me. I'm in a suburban neighborhood. Should I limb my trees up 6 to 10 feet like I've read about?
Yeah, and I think I touched on this a little bit in my presentation, but the answer is really that's not necessary. Like in the forest where those rules were developed or those standards were developed, there are lots and lots of trees close together. And so low limbing the base of the trees up high doesn't necessarily have a very substantial impact on like the way wind is going to be behaving vis-a-vis the trees. But when the trees are standing sort of in a more solitary way, limbing them up that high turns them into more of an umbrella where the wind can actually come in below. And we've seen, that blowdown is an unfortunate consequence of that. So that's why for our more urban neighborhoods in the county, we really just recommend limbing up like 3 feet or so, just so that you can get your rake in underneath the trees and sort of maintain that area.
All right, I had a couple questions. We did have a couple questions posed in our Q&A. Excuse me. One question posed by an anonymous attendee of ours asked, can you discuss the risk of the ongoing underground fires in the Arvada and or Boulder area?
I will say this, not my specialty. I think that might be a question for I'm not even sure, like a fire department. It probably depends a lot on how they're being managed, whether there's potential for embers or sparks to come out of those fires.
Okay. Another question here posed by Robert is, can you discuss the benefits of artificial intelligence wildfire detection?
Again, not quite my field of expertise, but there's definitely been I think that it's being used probably to some pretty good effect at the moment, or it's being piloted at least in terms of really identifying ignition sources in the wildland urban or the wildlands, like the wildland fuels, a lot more quickly than we have been able to do just by sort of noticing it or having even what you can see from a fire tower. So there's certainly a lot of research and sort of pilot programs being done in that field. And I think Boulder County, again, this is being run through the Sheriff's Department, so I'm not the specialist here, but we have installed a certain number of cameras in Boulder County that are being used for that we're sort of seeing how that works.
All right. I'm gonna take over the screen here real quick. I did have some pro tips for board members on our call today. Let me know if you cannot see the screen, but you should see pro tips board members on there. So just to kind of wrap things up. So if you're a board member in your HOA, and again, Abby, I just want to say thank you very much for your presentation today. I thought it was very informative, and I'm sure our callers learned a thing or two about fire mitigation. So we do appreciate you joining us on our HOA forum. But again, so for board members, work with an owner. If you have an owner who's interested in installing or fire hardening their property, work with them through kind of a cooperative lens instead of, I guess, board members. You might be if you get a request like this, you might consider it sort of like just another thing to do or pain to do, but consider it like something that the state of Colorado is really trying to work toward, and an opportunity to help your community address the fire risks that are currently in our state. So also discuss with your insurance agent possible savings for fire mitigation and fire hardened building material work on the common elements in your community. And I particularly like what Abby said about using it as sort of if the HOA were to use their common elements to install art or something like that, unit owners might be inclined to do the same. Don't forget that those applications, board members, you have 60 days to decide those applications, or according to state law, if there is no decision, that application is automatically deemed approved. So definitely take those applications seriously. And then conduct a review of your overall architectural review process, just to make sure that no decisions are being made arbitrarily or capriciously. This should go with all of your architectural decisions, not just fire hardening or mitigation applications. Check your governing documents for language that may inadvertently prevent installation of fire hardened building material. I'm not going to pretend to know the slightest thing about fire resistant construction, but some things you can look out for in your governing documents are for roofs, certain types of metals, for eaves and soffits, certain types of lumber, and special types of mesh vents. For more information on the criteria of ignition resistant construction, see the International Wildland Urban Interface Code, sections 504 to 506. And then also, when in doubt, consult with an attorney if you're not sure whether your documents could possibly be prohibiting fire hardened building material. It's best to get in front of those kinds of things and not be caught by surprise later on. And then some pro tips for owners: express your desire and communicate with your board and manager that you would like to pursue this type of installation or protection on your property. In your request, provide as much detail as you can in writing. What type of fencing material are you planning on using? And do your homework, do your research ahead of time. Does the fire hardened material meet the definitions provided for in CCIOA section 106.5? That is the public policy prohibition section, and House Bill 24-1091 will add to CCIOA. So it's going to be section 3833.3-106.5.3. And then also talk with your neighbors to gauge interest in possibly a street-wide or even community-wide fire mitigation project to potentially save on costs, and see if companies out there might offer discounts for bulk work. And then before engaging on any sort of project, speak with your homeowner's insurance agent for possible insurance savings for completing such a project. I wanted to throw up our contact information slide for both Wildfire Partners and the HOA Center there. Feel free to shoot Abby an email if you have any follow-up questions. Last slide here. I wanted to see, Abby, did you notice any questions in the Q&A that you'd like to answer here before we close up for the month?
Let me look through it really quickly. I see a comment. I don't know if this is truly true or not, but that says metal fencing is about comparable to wood in price right now. That would be a really exciting change in the market. And I have seen that shift happen with composite siding material, like fiber cement siding used to be more expensive than wood, and the last time I priced it, it was actually less expensive. So yeah, that's really good news. Somebody has a question, just says scrub oak bushes ? I think my answer to what I think they're asking is scrub oak does burn quite easily, quite hot. So again, nothing should be up against the home or in that first 5 feet. And then if you have sort of thickets of scrub oak, you might consider trimming them back so that you have some individual islands instead of just a continuous line of fuel.
Sorry, Abby, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I don't know how much time we have. I was trying to kind of go quickly through. I think Lisa said USAA offers a discount for homes that are part of a Firewise community, and that is true. There may be other companies that do have a discount as well. So yeah, check with if your community does become Firewise or is already. You could certainly talk to your insurance agent about whether there are some discounts. Alicia asked, are there specific financial incentives for communities for installing wildfire resistant measures in our communities? I can only speak to Boulder County because that is the community I'm from. And we do have a $500 rebate program going on right now for one of 4 calls to action. One is junk your junipers. The second one is retrofitting your fencing. The third one is installing non-combustible surface around your home. And the fourth one is installing wildfire resilient venting or screening vents that might be older and have gaps that would allow embers to enter your home. I don't know the answer to whether HOAs can require the 5-foot mitigation zone. Nick, do you have an answer to that question?
Let me see if I can find that question. Do you have the full question?
It says, can HOAs require the 5-foot mitigation zone around a home?
I'm not aware of a state law that would allow an HOA to require that. I'm happy to dig a little bit, do a little bit more research if you email me directly on that one. I can just answer this one real quick. I think it was already answered by David, but Rick asked, to what extent is the cited CCIOA legislation applicable to non-CCIOA HOAs, i.e. are any of the requirements or restrictions quote unquote universal? And because because the legislation was added to the public policy prohibition section of CCIOA, which is subsection 106.5, it will apply to all it will apply to both CCIOA and pre-CCIOA communities. And 106.5 is the section that, in addition to some of the fire prevention measures, also addresses energy efficiency, flags and signs, emergency vehicles, and some of those other policy matters.
There's one more question, and this may have been covered multiple times about, it says, you mentioned only trimming trees up a few feet. We've been told that this should be 8 to 10 feet. Did I misunderstand your recommendation? What I'm really trying to say here is that I have different recommendations for trees that are sort of in a suburban or urban setting versus in a forest. So in the forest, that 8 to 10 foot rule applies. When you're in a neighborhood and the trees are sort of much more individual, it might not be healthy for the tree to limit up that high. So I also, there's a whole very different sort of balance of fuels in a neighborhood versus in a forest. So I think it's a little bit situational. But I'm not trying to say that the Colorado State Forest Service standard for forestry is incorrect. It's perfect for the forested parts of the state, but this is more for the grasslands communities that have maybe an established pine tree in somebody's front yard.
Lisa shared a toolkit from the Division of Insurance with the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and I'll just kind of reiterate that's a great toolkit that is on the Division of Insurance website for questions and concerns related to HOA insurance and homeowners insurance. That is a great recommendation. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. If you haven't checked it out, please visit the Division of Insurance website. They're also conducting frequent stakeholder meetings regarding difficulty in obtaining HOA insurance in the state. You might be struggling, but just know that you're not the only one. And I would encourage you all to attend those meetings and share your story and experience as well. That's the Division of Insurance with Dora.
And Nick, do I have time for one more?
Yeah, sure.
So this person says, our HOA abuts 30 to 50 feet or less Boulder Parks and Recreation property near the hogbacks with unmowed grass and weed areas, also with some junipers. How much fire hardening should we do on our property when the city doesn't help us by maintaining a safety zone on its property? And that's a fantastic question, and it's something I've heard. And just being very honest, I would have to say that if the city is not doing their part on their property and you don't want your house to burn down, then you're going to really need to step up on your side of the fence. And I know that's probably not the answer that you were hoping to hear, but if we can harden our home so that they can withstand blowing embers, which means like clearing all the debris, at least on the side of your home that faces the city property, keeping that area really clean, I think it would serve two purposes. One, ideally it could prevent your home from burning down if the city's wildland fuels ignite. And then the second thing is it would give you some leverage when you go back to the city and say, hey, we are stepping up. We're doing everything we possibly can on our side. Please share with us your management plan so that we can see that you're providing some good partnership for us. So that would be my best advice in that type of a situation.
All right, well, it's about the top of the hour. On behalf of the Colorado Division of Real Estate, I just wanted to thank all of our attendees for joining our HOA Forum. And Abby, again, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to share your expertise with us, and also for Wildfire Partners for joining us. With that, I'll go ahead and wrap it up and close it out, unless there were any final comments or concerns there.
Nick, thank you so much for having me today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope everybody has a great weekend. All right, bye-bye.